this meeting is being recorded, and like all of our previous meetings, the recording will be posted on the Ala Wai project website, which is honolulu.gov/alawai. As I mentioned, today is the third in a series of 4 workshops. So we'll talk about the lower watershed and the canal today. Next week, we have left open, and so we're going to continue the discussions next week. The team is going to look through, the records and notes from the last 3 weeks and figure out what additional things do we need to ask you guys, the public and the stakeholders. What do we need your help with the most next week? So we're going to prioritize that for next week. But also, when we get into the breakouts today, I'd also like to ask you guys if there's anything particular that you want to make sure that we cover next week as well, then by all means, please bring that up during the breakouts. So just some highlights of some things that we heard last week during our discussion of MANOA. So again, continued constructive interest and engagement in general, which is always great to see. This is, as I've said before, a passionate and engaged community, which is fantastic. Second thing, we heard a lot of appreciation for the value of the management measure tracker and these workshops as well. So that's also always good to hear. We heard about the importance of local knowledge and expertise, which we completely agree with, and we have that expertise on the team, both on the USAE side and on the City of Honolulu side, of course. And those two groups, we have been working hand in hand from the beginning. And also that's why we have these workshops, so that we can learn from those of you who live in the watershed. We heard about the importance of collaboration between federal and state and local agencies, including the Corps and the city, as well as, the state. Again, agree completely with that. So the state hasn't been as involved to this point, but I think that will start to pick up as we move forward. We heard continued concern about debris management and stream maintenance. And so that has been a theme that we've heard about, and we've noted that, and we are bringing in folks from the Department of Facility Management to listen and to coordinate with. We heard concern about the Woodlawn stormwater drainage ditch being a source of an issue there. That's kind of similar to stream maintenance. That's something that is beyond the scope of this particular project and study, beyond our federal authority, but it's the kind of thing that we can look at it to make sure that we coordinate with the city about. There was also some information about new developments in the watershed that not all of us were aware of, so that was super useful. And of course, people were concerned about the effects of those developments on flood risk. Obviously, we've talked a lot about impervious surfaces and that being an issue, and would changing some of those to pervious surfaces be, that's one of the measures we're looking at, right? So we also have these new developments that may or may not be happening in the watershed, so we'll have to incorporate that into our analyses and figure out how that's going to affect our measures. There was also a preference expressed for underground detention of water versus above ground detention, and I think we, for a lot of reasons, aesthetic reasons among them, of course, that tends to be more expensive, but those are nevertheless, some measures that we have on our list that we are looking at. So today, here's a presentation. We'll be getting into our presentation in a minute. We have a lot of measures around the canal and the lower watershed, and so I expect that Cindy and Eric's presentation today will be maybe a little bit longer than usual, which means our breakout discussions will be a little bit shorter, but that's okay because we can continue those next week. So our hosts and discussants are sort of the usual suspects. With the addition today, we have Susan Henshaw, a planner on the study team, will be helping to assist facilitation today. Ben Reeder's off, but he'll be back next week. Okay, so ground rules for the presentation, as always. If you have questions, post them into the chat or just hold them until your breakouts. Keep your audio on mute during the presentation. And of course, you can always send me an email if you're having technical difficulties. And with that, I will hand it over to Cindy Akpal.
All right. Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. And so I realize that this slide might be a review for many of you who have attended our previous meetings, but the slides that I'll be going over, the next few slides, are really geared towards helping those who may not have been at those previous meetings and be new to these meetings, just to have a better understanding of where we are at within this study process. And so we held our initial round of public workshops back in November of 2021, where you all helped us to identify problems, opportunities, and potential solutions within this watershed. And since then, we've been doing model updates and meeting with various environmental agencies and technical experts. And we held a site visit last month where the technical team gathered additional field data, which really feeds into that hydrologic and hydraulic models. And then we developed a management measure tracking spreadsheet to compile the list of management measures that were proposed and to provide a status of where those measures are within the screening process. And so right now, where we are in this process, we're in that third arrow where we're beginning to develop alternative plans. And so we have our full list of measures now, and we started screening some of them. And so if we're to go back to our public meetings last November, this is really the area where the public said they'd like to have that opportunity to provide additional input into. And so that's really what we're doing here today. It's to make sure that we have all of your input, concerns, and feedback into this portion of the planning and development of the study. And so after we've screened the measures, that's when we'll develop the alternative plans and then start evaluating and comparing them. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide really incorporates the previous slide into the overall bigger picture, the overall study timeline. And so at the top is the same process that was just discussed, but within the context of the overall study process, we're currently at that double yellow arrow at the 4 sub-basin workshops, where we'll be talking about management measure, development, and screening. And so around November of this year, we anticipate release of a draft report with public meetings both before and after that release. And then following release of that draft, that's where we'll be further refining the plan with a feasibility level of analysis, and then come out with a final report in the spring of 2023. And so once again, there will be continuous public meetings both before and after release of that final report. Next slide, please. And so the management measure tracking spreadsheet, that can be found on the project website at www.honolulu.gov/Ala Wai, and it's on the resources tab. And so the image on the right is just a snapshot of what the tracker spreadsheet looks like, where it includes a measure proposed, a brief description of that measure, and then where we are at an evaluation of that particular measure. And so Eric will go into further detail about that in the next slide. But since this past week's meeting, we've received numerous comments and feedback. Thank you, everyone. But both by email and through our crowdsourced reporter. And so we'll provide those links at the end of this presentation. But we have yet to get through all those comments. So right now we have a total of 208 measures that have been proposed. And out of those 208 measures, 48 have been screened and 160 are still under consideration. And so because there are so many measures listed, these meetings will just not be able to cover each and every one of them. But we're also working to consolidate some of the similar and perhaps redundant measures. So if you see that your measure might have been screened out, just check to see if maybe it was because it was combined with a similar measure under a different name. And so our analysis, it will be ongoing and updated within the tracker on a regular basis. The goal of this tracker spreadsheet really is to allow the public to see in real time what it is we're working on and to allow that opportunity to provide immediate feedback either through email, crowdsource reporter, or through the contact form on our website. So I just really encourage all of you to keep checking the website for updates and keep submitting your feedback and comments to the project team. And so now I'll turn it over to Eric, who'll be going over the screening process and management measures in the lower watershed.
Thanks, Cindy, and thanks, Tyson. So good afternoon, everybody. As Cindy mentioned, we are in the phase of the study where we're developing and screening management measures. So we've spent a lot of time since we met in January and November, actually, to develop management measures. The team has been very actively, looking at management measures throughout the watershed, including the lower watershed where we're talking about today. But, hopefully we've also, we have been able to incorporate all of the measures from previous iterations as well. And so, you'll see those measures sprinkled throughout the presentation and the management measure tracker spreadsheet as well. So right now we're working on screening those measures. And so what does that mean? Essentially, we're taking a look at all of the measures and determining whether or not they're going to move forward to the next phase of the study development, which is where we kind of develop and evaluate various alternative plans for reducing flood risk throughout the watershed. And really up to this point in the study, we've undergone two different, what we'll call iterations of the screening process. So the first iteration, iteration 1, which I'm showing on the left here on the slide, is complete. And during this iteration, we basically use very, very high level, what we call criteria to screen out certain measures. And those were, one, is it within the study authority? So can we, as the Army Corps of Engineers, within the authority that we have to, under this study, implement the measure that was provided? And if the answer is no, then it gets screened out because we just can't do it under the authority that we have. The second criteria was technically feasible. So is it technically feasible? And I really want to note here that this isn't some arbitrary or subjective, evaluation by the study team. Really, we're taking existing data and conditions on the ground, as well as, current engineering standards and best practices to make the determination of whether or not it can be implemented from a technical perspective. And so that was the first iteration, and it's complete. And once we had that completed, then we started undergoing the second iteration, and that's what's ongoing right now. And so you'll see today that there are still a lot of measures that are under consideration, and that just means that we haven't really been able to get to it under the second iteration of the screening process. But really, the second iteration is where we kind of refine our analyses a little bit and start drilling down a little bit more. And we have different criteria at this phase as well. So we're kind of looking at things like effectiveness now. So how effective will it be at meeting our study objectives of reducing life safety risk and damages, economic damages? We're talking about efficiency. We're going to have a better understanding of what these measures might look like. We'll be able to develop high-level costs. Again, we can use engineering best practices and standards from a cost perspective and determine whether or not it's going to be cost effective. Again, at a very high level. And then finally, we're always taking into consideration environmental potential impacts and benefits based off of associated with the measures that we're looking at. And so it's really important here to note that we are using the existing models, or we have been up to this point, been using existing models and the associated data to make these determinations of effectiveness and efficiency and environmental impacts. And when we talk about those data, we're really talking about, water volumes. We can use the existing models to quantify how much water would we have to address in a specific area to reduce risk in that area. And so we understand what that is now. We can also look at expected damages. Again, with our economic models, we have a good sense of what the expected damages under the full range of flood events might be. So again, one of the things that was hit upon in the first meeting was what level of protection or what flood event are we really targeting right now? And the answer is we just don't know. So it could be the 2, the 5, the 10, the 25, the 50, the 100, the 250, the 500, right? So it's a wide range, and we can look at what the damages and expected benefits are under that range using the existing data. You'll also note during today's presentation, the previous ones, that we're going to be talking about measures that are Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And what that really means is that the study team in the second iteration has been able to look at things enough, and we have enough data to say, okay, this is a priority from an analytical perspective. Because we have so many measures, I mean, Cindy showed 160-ish measures, right, that have yet to be evaluated, and we have more, right, that we just haven't been able to incorporate yet from the previous meeting. We have to really be able to prioritize our analyses so that we are efficiently and effectively executing the study. So when I reference something as a Tier 1 measure, that just means that it's the highest analytical priority. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the measure that we believe is going to be included later or the ones that we think are going to be most effective. really, essentially what they are is measures, that will allow us to screen other measures. So for example, if we are looking at storage up in the upper watershed, we have the largest storage area, and we look at that from an analytical perspective, and it just doesn't get us the storage area that we need, then there's a lot of other smaller storage areas that we might be able to screen out just because we know that the biggest storage area won't get us what we need and the smaller ones won't as well. And so, again, it's just from an analytical perspective, which are our priorities. They will all be assessed and analyzed at some point. Okay, next slide. So this is just a map of the watershed to stay consistent with the previous ones. Again, we're focusing today on the lower watershed and the areas along the Ala Wai Canal itself. And so really we'll be focusing on kind of the MANOA Canal and then the Ala Wai Canal. And ultimately, how we reduce risk in those areas will really reduce risk in the like Makalimo-Ili areas and those other communities along the lower canal itself. So next slide. So I know for those of you that were in the previous meetings, we kind of presented this slide already. A lot of the measures that we've been considering are natural and nature-based measures, and we've talked a lot about what those mean, what that means in previous meetings. But essentially, it's using measures that may mimic mimic natural processes, things like creating wetlands, right? Wetlands act as storage areas, and so we can implement wetlands and reduce flood risk. And so a lot of these you'll notice, like forest and invasive species management. Again, we've identified those as tier 1 measures because we have identified those as an analytical priority. So what we're going to do is go into our models and do some sensitivity analyses that kind of simulate reforestation, removing the non-native species and replanting them with native species to see how that will change evapotranspiration and infiltration rates and ultimately downstream flood risk. Similarly, with decreased impervious surface areas, we've identified this as a modeling priority. There are a lot of areas where there's impervious surface, so large, say, parking lots, and we can go in and see what will happen if we put more permeable pavements in. So again, those are sensitivity runs that we're going to be doing now that our final models are up and running. So there are other ones like non-structural measures. So that's not a natural nature-based measure. That's a non-structural measure. Things like elevating and flood-proofing homes. Again, we have to incorporate those into our study and our analyses, and so that is a tier 1 measure for us. We'll be looking at those measures throughout the watershed. The same with debris management. So we haven't quite gotten there from an analytical perspective yet, so it's technically still under consideration, but we're going to be going into the models and looking at things like bridges, right, that can act to build up debris and how that might influence flooding in adjacent areas. Finally, some wetlands and agriculture, so we can convert existing green space or other spaces into wetlands, or like taro fields or loikalo, and so we'll be looking at that in areas as well as along the Ala Wai golf course. You can see there, kind of in the bottom on the table, 41. We'll be looking at converting the golf course to those types of wetlands measures as well. I will say that for a lot of those, when we're talking about implementing natural and nature-based measures like wetlands in some of these storage areas, the study team, you'll see later on that we've identified storage and retention as a priority, the tier 1 measure. And really what we're going to do is see if we can maximize storage in some of these areas. Can we reduce flood risk enough in those areas? And so that's really going to tell us whether or not something like implementation of a wetland in that same area will be effective, right? So if we can't get it, through creating berms and maximizing storage, it's going to be really difficult for us to get the storage we need with a wetland as well. And so anyway, again, just as we go forward, something is a tier 1, it just means it's a priority from an analytical perspective. I think I hit all those. Okay, thanks, Tyson. I'm probably talking too much, so I'll try to go a little faster. So
it's all good.
Okay, all right. So we're moving now into the MANOA Canal. And so there are a couple of tier 1 measures that we've identified, and they're storage-based. So the Kaimuki High School Detention Basin is basically utilizing the sports fields there as detention. So you can divert waters from the MANOA Canal into that area and store them, ultimately reducing or changing the timing and the volume of water reaching the canal. The same with the golf course, right? This was proposed in other iterations of the study. You can divert water from the MANOA Canal into the golf course and store it so that, less water is entering the Ala Wai Canal as quickly, right? And that can reduce those peak volumes and peak flows that can flood areas around the canal. And then also the berm, the flood wall around the Iolani and Ala Wai elementary schools. So again, that was something that was looked at in the previous iterations. When they started implementing some of these other measures, they realized that they needed to protect those schools. And so flood walls or berms around those schools are being considered in this iteration of the study as well. So move forward. So kind of along the same vein of the Kaimuki High School and the golf course detention basins, there are other green spaces that exist along the canal right now. So the Ala Wai Community Park represents an area where you could either kind of, as number 32 is showing, make a retention or detention area. So you could actually capture water from some of the drainage ditches coming into the canal right there, so and prevent it from going out into the Ala Wai Canal as quickly. You could also just kind of redesign the park and make it a floodable area, right, from the canal, from the Ala Wai Canal itself. And that would ultimately, increase the area that can flood without having impact, ultimately increasing the overall capacity of the canal. And again, kind of 34 there showing the detention basin for the Malka drainage storage. And that's kind of what I was talking about. If we can capture some of the runoff from those other drainage ditches in those existing green spaces and storing it prior to getting into the canal, then you might reduce inundation in and around the Ala Wai Canal itself. So there are a number of measures that kind of what I'll call, are thinking about increasing storage capacity within the canal itself. And so these are kind of grouped that way. So one thing that we could do is elevate the canal walls, right? So we could increase the canal capacity by elevating the existing canal flood walls. Well, I'll say that those existing flood walls were designed for a specific purpose, right? And they're serving that purpose now. The minute you start going in there and trying to elevate the existing canal walls, you start worrying about, could the new wall, or, could you increase the elevation while maintaining its structural soundness? And so it could be that you have to completely, or likely would be that you would have to completely redesign all of the walls themselves. And that could be very expensive and cost prohibitive. But you could elevate the canal wall. We could deepen the canal, right? You could dig it deeper and then completely replace the canal walls. When you dig it deeper, again, you're starting to get into some structural stability concerns with the existing walls. And so you'd have to, basically redesign and reconstruct the canal wall to the entire length if you were going to deepen it. You could also widen the canal to increase storage capacity. And then, dredge the MANOA Pololo Canal. So again, kind of getting out of the Ala Wai Canal. You could also dredge similarly to dredging the Ala Wai Canal, you could dredge the MANOA Pololo Canal, reducing inundation in those surrounding areas. So all of those are under consideration at this point because we just haven't gotten there from an analytical perspective. And so they're still on the table. We just haven't really been able to tier them or really focus on them up to this point. The one I do want to mention is flat gates on the storm drains. And so we've talked a lot about in these meetings, talked a lot about, whether or not the Army Corps of Engineers can come in and address kind of storm drainage infrastructure. This is one instance where, because flooding can go up storm drains from the Ala Wai Canal, that flooding is essentially starting at the canal. We could put flat gates on those existing storm drains to prevent flooding from going up into the existing storm drains. And so if you're increasing the capacity of the canal itself, we may be needing to implement flat gates on those storm drains as well. So next slide. We've also have a lot of measures that kind of, whether they're specific to pumping itself, so trying to pump water through the canal faster to evacuate that water and increase the capacity of the canal that way. There's also, a lot of measures to kind of put some type of structure at the mouth of the canal, maybe a miter gate or some other structure, kind of, I don't want to say dam, it's not the right word, the engineers are probably cringing, right? But basically a blockade of some sort, and then you could pump from behind it, right? So you could evacuate the canal and allow water to kind of come back and store behind it. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, whether or not we're using submersible pumps, or I know in the previous iteration there was the tower pump that a lot of folks were concerned with because of the view shed. And so there are ways that we can implement pumps and kind of get water out of the canal faster. Retractable flood barriers. So that's similarly, you could relocate the existing or the pump structure that was proposed under the last iteration, kind of move it a ways, kind of out of the way. And so all of these kind of get to pumping, right? And that's kind of the purpose of them. And so again, they're under consideration at this point, meaning we just haven't gotten there from an analytical perspective. If you recall, been focusing kind of first up in the upper watershed and trying to address how much water gets down to the lower watershed first. And once we have a better understanding of that, we have a better understanding of how much water we would have to pump or how much additional water we would have to store. And so, again, that's why a lot of these are under consideration still. Okay, next slide, please. I think this is the last slide for the technical measures. So these are kind of more along the lines of tunneling or a second outlet. So essentially getting water, from the canal to the, the ocean via other avenues other than the canal. So, there is the opportunity for micro tunnels or smaller tunnels underneath or through Waikiki. And so that's under consideration. We haven't really analytically gotten there yet. There is the opportunity to have a second outlet to the canal, which I think, way back, in the very very early days of the canal when it was first proposed, there was a second outlet proposed. So we could create that second outlet, and it could be an open channel, or it could be an underground kind of conduit through a large kind of box culvert system. So that's 21 and 22 there in the map. There are other also opportunities to utilize existing storm drain infrastructure that might get kind of, I'll say turned on, right? So if the canal waters get high enough, you could use those existing storm drains kind of as a second canal outlet where they would trigger kind of them opening up and allowing water to move out into the ocean through that, through that existing infrastructure. And we've identified existing infrastructure along Pocky Avenue and Lehigh Avenue. And so those are shown at 190 and 191 kind of going around the Kapiolani Park there. And then also there was an idea submitted to us, the 23, the East Canal buried pipe system. And so again, it's along the same vein of using an underground tunnel or pipe, but you could have a pump associated with it that could pump water out of the canal during high flow events or pump fresh water in to the canal to kind of, be a benefit to the ecosystem as well under times when it's not necessarily a high flood event. So a lot of those, I'll say the second outlets and kind of the bypasses are tier 2 measures. Again, we were able to go out there and look at the existing infrastructure while we were out there. So we have a better sense of what that might entail. And so it's a little higher up on our list from an analytical perspective. Again, we're trying to utilize existing infrastructure when we can so that we have less of a footprint on the ground, right? And it's kind of less burdensome from that perspective. So that's why those are tier 2. And some of the other ones are still under consideration. So next slide. And then there are a number of measures that we've screened out. And again, kind of just describing them here, but the full description of why they've been screened out is in the management tracker spreadsheet. So again, I really encourage folks to go in there because it does give more of a technical engineering perspective on why it was screened out. So if we just kind of go through them quickly. Deepening the canal without, right, so this is just deepening in and of itself. Has been screened out because of the stability issues. So if you deepen the canal, you would again have to kind of redesign and reconstruct all of the walls along the canal. So that measure was discussed earlier and still under consideration, but just deepening without that additional effort has been screened out at this time. And the same thing on number 4, deepening the canal for periodic pump drainage. Again, you cannot deepen without redesigning and reconstructing those walls. Canal cleanups and the microorganisms to eliminate sludge, those are great ideas, right? And they're phenomenal from an environmental standpoint. I know debris in the canal, or debris can cause a lot of flooding, even prior to getting the canal. But within the canal and that kind of lower area itself, especially the microorganisms, so they can be effective at reducing the amount of sludge in the water. But we have data that show that, if you were to remove a lot of earth at the bottom of the canal, you could have some benefit. But again, the kind of removal of sludge through microorganisms is just not going to increase capacity enough to reduce flood risk. And so it's been screened out. Oysters to clean up the canal, again, as a stream and river and aquatic ecologist, I love that idea, right? But it's kind of outside of our authority because although that would do a lot for cleaning the water and benefiting water quality, again, this is a flood risk management study, and so those purely environmental benefits are kind of outside the scope and authority of this study. Flood walls on the Waikiki side only has been screened out because, again, we are trying to reduce flood risk everywhere, right? So if you just construct flood walls on one side, that could induce flooding on the other side of the canal. And so we would never look at, implementing flood walls only on one side because it could, again, induce flooding on the other side. We would be looking at reducing risk kind of holistically on both sides, right? And then a dam at the canal mouth, so replacing high walls on either side and basically creating a dam, and you could pump behind it. Again, that's been screened out just because you wouldn't necessarily want to put a dam at the mouth of the canal because, again, that could cause water to back up. We do have other measures that are, more along the lines of putting some structure there and potentially pumping out, but just a dam for, in of itself, the mouth has been screened out because, again, that can cause water back up behind it. So I think I've talked a lot, and I know I've gone longer than the other ones, but Tyson said that was okay. So go ahead, next slide. Oh, all right. I'm done.
Yeah, you're good. Eric, I just wanted to, actually, let me go back to that. Just wanted to point out and just confirm with you, anything that has been screened out, of course, that doesn't mean that it can't be considered for some future study, either a federal study or city project or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think, you have made the comment, that's a great point, Tyson. You've made the comment numerous times during these meetings that this study only represents one piece of the larger puzzle for the watershed, right? So what we can do in this study, we have our authority and we have our limits, but what we can do can also mesh and marry well with other efforts conducted by other entities. And so that's a great point and very important to reiterate here.
All right, cool. Okay, so I'm going to break us up into our discussion groups. Susan, our planner, will be here in the main room, facilitating here. I think I see a couple people that are on the phone only. So you guys are, the way that WebEx works is you will stay here in the main room. So Susan can chat with y'all. And then discussion group 1, Kelly and I will be the facilitators for that. Kelly's a technical lead for the study, so she can answer a lot of technical questions that I, as a sociologist, cannot. Discussion group 2, Eric and Cindy will be in there as usual. And so I'm going to just do random assignment. We don't have as many people today as we've had the last couple of weeks. Because although the total number is similar, we've got a lot more folks from the city, our colleagues from the city have joined us today. So if we need to, I can end the breakout group a little early and bring us back for a large group discussion. But I'm going to go ahead and get us started on the breakouts. And actually, before I get started, I do have couple more things to share with you. So the questions that we have, same as the last few weeks, basically if you have questions about the screening process or about any of the measures that Eric has discussed or anything that he has not discussed, and also whether you think we're doing all right in terms of capturing the measures and are we missing any measures. And then the one additional question that we have today is what would you like to discuss or learn more about in next week's workshop, which will be back on Friday again next week. And the ground rules for the discussion groups, if you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat. You can also click the raise hand tool there at the bottom. Keep your audio on mute unless you're talking. The first time you talk, if you can introduce yourself, that'd be great. Be conscious of technical acronyms and so forth. And also just be aware, not to talk too long and help ensure that other folks have a chance to speak as well would be great. Okay, so here we go. Breakouts. Boom. Usually takes a second. For those of you who are co-hosts, you may need to manually select a breakout room to join. All right. I'm going into group 1, and I will see the rest of y'all in a bit. Let me know if you have any issues.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Susan Henshaw. I'm a planner with the Army Corps of Engineers working on this study. It looks like we've got a couple people in this room. Oh, some people are headed to breakout rooms. So maybe I'll just kind of go ahead and get started and see if there's any questions or comments from folks in the main room here. Can people hear me?
Susan, this is Laura Thielen from the City Department of Parks and Recreation. Yes, I can hear you. Are we in a breakout room or is this still the main room?
This is the main room.
Okay. I don't know how to manually get in a breakout room and I was not sent to one.
I wonder if I can send you to one. I'm not 100% sure either.
Yeah, this is Minerva. Me too. They're locked. The different breakout sections look like they're locked. So I can't join.
It looks like there's 6 of us who are not assigned.
Okay. Sometimes people who are co-hosts have to manually assign themselves, which I think means, like, do you have something up that says participants? It has like the list of participants on the right-hand side.
Yeah, I see the breakout sessions, so we can just go pick a host and move to.
Like mine has a button that says join by breakout session 1 or breakout session 2. I think you can just do that.
Okay, I will try.
Yeah, give it a try. Laura, did it work for you? Looks like it did. So for other folks who can hear me, are there any comments or questions about what Eric went over that folks would like to discuss? So again, I'm Susan Henshaw. I'm a project planner with the Army Corps of Engineers for the Ala Wai study. And if you guys can hear me, if there's any questions or comments about the presentation that we just all saw, please feel free to speak up now.
Hi, this is Brandon. I'm switching from my computer to mobile because I'm gonna have to be driving someplace.
Okay.
Could I be sent into? I think my other one was breakout session 1.
Oh, that's the one. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know.
if you can. I'm with the city, so maybe I have that.
Oh, you're with the city?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I might have to reach out to Tyson. I don't know why usually everybody gets automatically put into a breakout room.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to find a way on my phone how to get out of it.
Yeah, hold on. Let me send a message to Tyson.
Thank you.
Okay. So folks in the main room, I think our next steps are we're just kind of waiting for the group to come back. If there's any questions or comments or items you'd like to discuss, especially related to what we just went over in the PowerPoint, please feel free to go ahead and unmute and we can talk about it.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the main room. I see not everyone made it through. We have a few fewer participants coming back, but that's fine. There we go. So yeah, we had a great discussion in my group. I hope the other groups also were fruitful. I have captured all the info. Kelly and I have captured all the info from our group, and my colleagues were capturing the info from the other groups. So we will again take all of that information and look at our notes from the previous weeks as well, and figure out what's the best approach for next week. Once again, if there are particular questions that you have that you want us to address, feel free to send us an email, alawai@honolulu.gov. Let us know what you would like to talk about. We have received a lot of input actually in the last week, both through the email and on Crowdsource Reporter there. Keep that coming if you've got it. And again, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Mahalo. And stop record.